He was Seoul's coldest and most powerful CEO, a widower who lived for his work, with a sickly son no one could understand. His mansion was an ice palace until she, Lee Min-ji, a humble and compassionate nanny, entered their lives. When the young heir, Kim Ji-hoon, collapsed after a meal, everyone panicked. But it was Min-ji's keen eye and pure heart that unraveled a deadly secret. Saving the boy's life and perhaps his father's frozen heart. Prepare for a Korean drama where love blossoms where least expected and a single act of kindness can change the fate of an entire family. The housekeeper's sharp cry echoed through the mansion, shattering the icy silence with a wave of panic. Kim Ji-hoon, the young heir, lay on the polished marble floor of the dining room, his face pale and his lips purplish. His eyes were rolled back and small spasms racked his fragile body. The fine porcelain plate, with remnants of a vegetable and meat soup, lay overturned beside him, its faint scent still lingering in the air. Lee Min-ji, who moments before had been helping to clear the table, felt her heart turn to ice. In an instant, the calm she had tried to maintain since stepping into that ice palace dissolved. She ran, kneeling beside the boy, before any other staff member could react. Chaos erupted. Voices rose, hurried footsteps echoed, phones were dialed in a frenzy. "Call the doctor! Sir, it's Mr. Kim Ji-hoon! Quick!" Kim Hyun-woo, the CEO, appeared like a hurricane. His firm, heavy steps crossed the corridor, his deep, authoritative voice cutting through the air. "What is happening here?" But upon seeing his son, his steel demeanor faltered. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, widened with a primal terror. It was a rare, almost shocking sight to see the most powerful man in Seoul crumble before his son's vulnerability. He threw himself beside Ji-hoon, his hand trembling as he touched the boy's feverish forehead. "Ji-hoon, son, what happened?" Min-ji, however, did not allow herself the luxury of panic. Her mind, trained by a hard life and the necessity of solving problems with few resources, worked at high speed. While everyone screamed for medical help, she focused on the details. Her eyes swept over Ji-hoon's face. Her hands felt his weak pulse. Then her attention went to the overturned plate. The soup. What was in it? She noticed something unusual. Small pieces of something fibrous and yellowish, which didn't seem to be part of the usual vegetables. A subtle aroma, almost imperceptible beneath the smell of the food, but one that, for Min-ji, brought a distant memory, a warning. It was the smell of ginseng. Not common ginseng, but a wilder, more potent variety, which her grandmother, a traditional healer in her native village, used with extreme caution. "Ginseng," she murmured, almost inaudible, but her eyes widened. She remembered her grandmother's stories about children with delicate constitutions who reacted violently to wild ginseng, especially in high doses. The Kim family was known for its fragile health, and Ji-hoon, in particular, had always been a boy prone to mysterious illnesses. The family doctor, Dr. Park, an elderly and respectable man, arrived, accompanied by a team of nurses. They began to examine Ji-hoon, to measure his blood pressure, to try to revive him. Hyun-woo watched, helpless, pain twisting his face. "Do something! Save my son!" He roared, his voice choked. Min-ji knew there was no time for a formal diagnosis. She had to act. It was a risk, but Ji-hoon's life was at stake. She stood up, her voice surprisingly firm amidst the chaos. "Mr. Kim, Dr. Park, it's the ginseng. He ate wild ginseng in the soup." Everyone stopped, Hyun-woo's eyes full of unshed tears, fixed on her. Dr. Park, a bit condescending, frowned. "Ginseng. Miss Lee, ginseng is a tonic. It's impossible for it to be the cause." "It's not impossible," Min-ji retorted, the passion and urgency in her voice surprising everyone, including herself. "My grandmother was a healer. She always said that for some children, especially the more sensitive ones, wild ginseng can be a poison." The symptoms are exactly these: pallor, spasms, difficulty breathing. He needs to vomit. We need to get it out of his body. Hyunwoo, caught between despair and disbelief, looked at Minji. There was something in her eyes, an unwavering conviction that made him hesitate. He had known Dr. Park for years, but the doctor seemed lost. Minji, on the other hand, spoke with frightening certainty. "She's right." A female voice, the head chef, Mrs. Choi, suddenly exclaimed, pale. "I added a little wild ginseng my brother gave me. He said it was to strengthen the boy, since he's always sick. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." A heavy silence fell over the room. The chef's confession confirmed Minji's words. Dr. Park, now with a look of shock and guilt, began to re-evaluate the situation. "If that's true, we need to induce vomiting immediately and administer an antidote to neutralize the effect." But Minji was already acting. She ran to the kitchen, ignoring the astonished stares, and returned with a glass of warm water and a pinch of salt. "Mr. Kim, please hold him. Dr. Park, if you can help me turn him on his side." With a determination bordering on recklessness, she forced the salt water into Ji-hoon's mouth, massaging his throat to induce vomiting. Seconds stretched into hours. Hyunwoo watched, paralyzed, as the humble nanny he barely knew took control of the situation, risking everything to save his son. He saw the strength in her arms, the concentration on her face, the compassion that radiated from her. Then, with a violent retch, Ji-hoon vomited. A momentary but intense relief filled the room. Dr. Park quickly administered an injection to stabilize the boy's heart, but it was Minji's swift action that had turned the tide. Ji-hoon was still weak, but color slowly began to return to his lips, and the spasms subsided. Hyunwoo felt a wave of gratitude and shock. The nanny he had hired purely out of formality, the woman he barely noticed, had just saved his son's life. The deadly secret no one could unravel, the reason behind Ji-hoon's recurring illnesses, had been discovered by her, an outsider, with a pure heart and a keen eye. The ice around Kim Hyunwoo's heart began to crack, revealing a fissure of vulnerability and a new, unsettling admiration. The ice mansion, for a brief moment, felt an unexpected warmth. But the question remained: how had such a dangerous ingredient for Ji-hoon ended up in his soup, and why did no one else know? The tension was far from over. The air in the Kim mansion, once heavy with panic, now trembled with a mix of relief and shock. Ji-hoon, though pale and exhausted, breathed more regularly. Dr. Park, his hands still trembling slightly, confirmed the boy's vital signs. A look of deep embarrassment and guilt on his face. The injection he administered helped stabilize him, but the truth was undeniable. Kim Ji-hoon's life had been saved by Lee Minji's swift and instinctive action. Kim Hyunwoo watched everything, paralyzed. His eyes, which moments before had reflected an icy terror, now carried a different intensity as they fixed on Minji. She, oblivious to the stares, delicately wiped Ji-hoon's face, her movements soft and full of a tenderness that starkly contrasted with the mansion's sterile atmosphere. The CEO, the man who commanded empires with a blink of an eye, felt like a novice, a stranger in his own home, unable to understand the simplicity and depth of that connection. He'll be all right. Hyunwoo's voice, still hoarse with emotion, broke the silence. It was a question he never imagined asking with such vulnerability. Dr. Park cleared his throat, composing himself. "Yes, Mr. Kim. Thanks to Miss Lee's intervention, the worst is over. We'll need to monitor him closely for a few hours, but the poison was expelled in time. Wild ginseng, as Miss Lee pointed out, is extremely potent and dangerous for sensitive constitutions like Ji-hoon's. I'm sorry. We should have been more cautious with his diet." The confession from the doctor, a pillar of family trust for years, only deepened the abyss of guilt and anger that opened in Hyunwoo's chest. How could something so vital to his son have been neglected? How could he, the father, have allowed this to happen? And why did a newly arrived nanny know more about his son's health than his doctors and his staff? His eyes turned to Mrs. Choi, the head chef, who was huddled in a corner, tears streaming down her face. "Mrs. Choi," Hyunwoo began, his voice low but laced with a coldness that made bones shiver. "Explain yourself." Mrs. Choi sobbed, trembling. "Sir, I swear I didn't know. My brother gave me the ginseng, said it was from the mountains, very pure, and that it would be good for the young master to give him strength. He's always been so frail. I just wanted to help. I would never ever harm him." The explanation was plausible, the motivation perhaps well-intentioned, but the almost fatal result was undeniable. The Kim mansion, a bastion of perfection and control, had failed miserably to protect its heir, and the blame fell on everyone, but especially on him, Kim Hyunwoo, who delegated everything, who trusted blindly, who was always absent. Minji, sensing the rising tension, stood up. "Mr. Kim, Mrs. Choi likely had no intention of harming Ji-hoon. Wild ginseng is seen as a powerful tonic in our culture, but its use requires extreme knowledge and caution, especially with children. Not everyone knows the risks for more fragile constitutions." Her voice, calm and reasonable, cut through the spiral of anger that was beginning to consume Hyunwoo. She wasn't defending Mrs. Choi, but contextualizing, seeking understanding instead of immediate condemnation. Hyunwoo looked at her, surprise mixed with a pang of irritation. Who was she to intervene? But at the same time, he couldn't ignore the truth in her words. Anger was a luxury he couldn't afford now. The priority was Ji-hoon and his son's future safety. "Dr. Park," Hyunwoo said, his voice returning to its usual authority, but with a new layer of seriousness. "I want a complete review of all of Ji-hoon's medications, his supplements and diet, every ingredient, every gram. And I want Miss Lee consulted at every step. She has demonstrated a knowledge that, apparently, we lacked." Dr. Park nodded, humiliated, but professional. "Yes, Mr. Kim, immediately." Minji felt a chill down her spine. To be consulted, she, a humble nanny, on the same level as the renowned Dr. Park, it was an immense responsibility and an unexpected honor. But her focus remained on Ji-hoon. She knelt again beside the boy, who now slept a more peaceful sleep, his breathing soft. She touched his forehead, feeling the warmth diminish. Hyunwoo watched the scene. The nanny he had hired by recommendation and for her discreet appearance proved to be an unexpected force. Her keen eye, her pure heart, her sharp intuition. Everything he, in his life of power and calculation, had lost or never possessed. He felt an overwhelming gratitude mixed with a strange sense of discomfort. He wasn't used to owing anyone, much less an employee. "Miss Lee," he said, his voice a little softer than usual, "thank you. You saved my son's life." Minji looked up, meeting his eyes. There was a depth there she hadn't expected. A vulnerability he tried to hide. "I only did what was right, Mr. Kim. Ji-hoon is a precious child." The mansion, which was once an ice palace, now seemed to have a fissure, a crack through which a thread of warmth began to seep. The ginseng incident wasn't just a scare, it was a catalyst. It exposed the flaws in Hyunwoo's rigid system, his staff's blindness, and, most importantly, his son's fragility. But the question persisted, echoing in the silent corridors of Hyunwoo's mind. Why was Ji-hoon so sensitive? Why was he always sick? The ginseng was the cause of one incident, but would it be the key to the deadly secret that permeated the boy's health, or just the tip of a much larger iceberg? The tension was far from dissipating. In fact, it was only beginning to deepen, revealing layers of mystery and vulnerability that no one in the Kim mansion was prepared to face. The ice in Hyunwoo's heart had cracked, but the path to true warmth was still long and uncertain. The night in the Kim mansion dragged on, no longer with acute panic, but with exhaustion and the lingering echo of the near disaster. Ji-hoon slept, a medicated and still fragile sleep, but his regular breathing was a balm to everyone's nerves. Minji remained by his side, a silent sentinel, her gaze fixed on the boy. Her fingers, once agile at inducing vomiting, now gently stroked the damp hair on Ji-hoon's forehead. It was a scene of tenderness that starkly contrasted with the usual coldness of that home. Hyunwoo watched from afar. From the doorway, Dr. Park had already departed, promising to return at dawn for a new assessment. Mrs. Choi, after a tense interrogation and the promise of a rigorous internal investigation, had been dismissed to rest, though the tremor in her hands and the guilt in her eyes indicated that sleep would be a distant luxury. Only Minji remained, the nanny he barely knew, and he, the father, who felt like a stranger in his own grief and in his own home. The ice in his heart had indeed cracked, but the fissure revealed not only vulnerability, but also an overwhelming confusion. He, Kim Hyunwoo, the man of absolute control, had been blind to his son's fragility, blind to the hidden dangers in his own kitchen, blind to the woman who now, with a disarming simplicity, brought warmth to a room he had transformed into a sterile sanctuary. The image of Minji forcing salt water into Ji-hoon's mouth, the determination in her eyes, the strength of her arms. That haunted and fascinated him. She didn't hesitate. She didn't think about the consequences for herself. She just acted. Miss Lee, his voice low and hoarse, broke the heavy silence. Minji turned, her eyes a little swollen but still alert. You don't need to stay awake all night. There are nurses on duty. Minji smiled faintly. He needs a familiar face when he wakes up, Mr. Kim, and I promise to take care of him. The simplicity of her answer was a direct blow to Hyunwoo's calculating complexity. He paid for services, for loyalty, for results. She offered care, promise, and presence. He approached, hesitant, stopping beside the bed. Ji-hoon's face, still pale, seemed more serene now. How did you know? The question hung in the air, laden with everything he couldn't express. His shame, his curiosity, his growing admiration. Minji looked at Ji-hoon, then at Hyunwoo. My grandmother was a wise woman. She taught me a lot about plants, about the body, about the connection between them. She used to say that each person is unique, and what heals one can harm another. Wild ginseng is powerful, but for some children, especially those with a weak fire in their body, it can be a poison that extinguishes the vital flame. Ji-hoon always seemed to have this weak fire. Weak fire, Hyunwoo repeated, his brow furrowed. It was a language he didn't understand, so different from medical diagnoses and performance charts. Yes, a more sensitive, more vulnerable constitution. That's why he's always sick, Mr. Kim. It's not just the ginseng. The ginseng was a catalyst, but the root of the problem is deeper. He needs different care, an approach that nurtures his essence, not just treats the symptoms. Minji's words resonated in Hyunwoo. Different care. He had surrounded Ji-hoon with the best doctors, the most expensive treatments, the most balanced nutrition, but had never considered his son's essence. He had tried to mold Ji-hoon in the image of a strong and healthy heir, without realizing that Ji-hoon's strength lay in his delicacy. Doctor, Park will conduct a complete review of Ji-hoon's diet and medications, Hyunwoo said, his voice firmer. I want you to be present in all discussions. Your perspective is vital. Minji nodded, the responsibility weighing on her, but without hesitation. I'll do my best, Mr. Kim. The night advanced in a shared silence, breaking the ice between them in a way that years of formal cohabitation never could. Hyunwoo felt something move within him, a layer of his armor peeling away. He had trusted in systems, in professionals, in money. But who truly saved his son was the intuition, the ancestral wisdom, and the pure heart of a woman he considered merely an employee. But Minji's question about Ji-hoon's weak fire, about the root of the problem being deeper, echoed in his mind. The wild ginseng had been an accident, a supervisory failure. But Ji-hoon's chronic sensitivity, that was a mystery that not even the best specialists had unraveled. There was something more, something hidden in the mansion's shadows, perhaps in the Kim family's own history, that made Ji-hoon so vulnerable. The mansion, which once seemed like a silent tomb, now seemed to breathe with a different tension. It was no longer the fear of imminent loss, but the unease of a secret about to be revealed. The ice in Hyunwoo's heart had cracked, but the path to true warmth was still long and uncertain. And Minji, the poor nanny, was about to become the key to unraveling not only Ji-hoon's health, but also the deepest mysteries of the Kim family. The game had changed, and the stakes were higher than ever. Morning arrived at the Kim mansion, but it didn't bring the lightness of a new day. Instead, a heavy quiet hung in the air, a silence that wasn't of peace, but of exhaustion and apprehension. Ji-hoon slept in his room, his fever diminishing, his breathing more stable. But the image of his small body convulsing still haunted everyone. Minji, exhausted, but with a silent determination, had dozed off sitting by the bed, her fingers still brushing Ji-hoon's small hand. She was the only constant presence, the only point of warmth in an environment that, despite its luxury, always seemed cold. Hyunwoo watched her from the doorway of the room, a whirlwind of conflicting emotions in his chest. Gratitude, yes, an overwhelming gratitude he didn't know how to express, but also a deep unease. Minji's presence there, so intrinsic to his son's recovery, was a constant reminder of his own failures. He, the man who commanded empires, had been unable to protect his own son. And salvation had come from a simple woman, whose words about weak fire and essence were as strange as they were fascinating. He approached, the sound of his footsteps muffled by the Persian rug. Minji woke with a gentle start, her eyes meeting his. There was a vulnerability in her, a fatigue she tried to hide, but also an unwavering strength. "Miss Lee," he began, his voice softer than usual, "you must be exhausted. Please, rest. The nurses can take care of him now." Minji shook her head, a small, tired smile on her lips. "I'm fine, Mr. Kim. Ji-hoon still needs me. He's calmer when he sees me." It was an undeniable truth. In recent days, Minji had become Ji-hoon's anchor, his safe harbor amidst the storm of his fragile health. Hyunwoo felt a pang of envy, a painful recognition that he, the father, could not offer the same comfort. "Dr. Park will arrive shortly for the review I requested," Hyunwoo continued, changing the subject, his voice recovering some of its usual authority. "Remember, your presence is vital. I want you to share all your observations, your perspectives." Minji nodded, the responsibility weighing on her shoulders. She, a nanny, about to sit at a table with one of Seoul's most renowned doctors to discuss the health of a millionaire heir. It was a scenario that defied all logic, but Ji-hoon's life depended on it. Shortly after, Dr. Park arrived, his expression contrite and professional. The humiliation of the previous night was still palpable, but he was a man of science, and science demanded answers. The meeting took place in the vast living room, where the morning light streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the dust dancing in the air, as if the mansion itself was breathing a heavy air of secrets. Hyunwoo sat at the head of the table, Minji to his right and Dr. Park to his left, with a stack of medical records in front of him. The nurses and Mrs. Choi, the housekeeper, were absent. The discussion was strictly between them. Dr. Park, Hyunwoo began, his voice cold and incisive, I want a complete analysis. Every medication, every supplement, every item of Ji-hoon's diet since birth. And I want Miss Lee to present her observations. Dr. Park cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. Mr. Kim, as requested, I have reviewed the records. Ji-hoon has a history of allergic sensitivity and a compromised immune system, which explains his susceptibility to infections and reactions. Wild ginseng, as Miss Lee correctly identified, was a dangerous trigger for his constitution. But that doesn't explain the recurrence, Dr. Park, Minji interjected, her voice calm but firm. It's not just a matter of external triggers. Ji-hoon's body, his essence, as my grandmother would say, is intrinsically fragile. He has a weak fire. This means his vital energy is low, making him vulnerable to everything, from a common cold to reactions to foods that would be harmless to other children. Dr. Park frowned. Miss Lee, with all due respect, Western medicine does not operate under the concept of weak fire. Our diagnoses are based on clinical evidence, laboratory tests, biological markers. And those markers, Dr. Park, what do they show? Minji asked, undeterred. They show a child who is constantly sick. Despite all your cutting-edge treatments, there is no marker for the body's overall vitality, for the ability to recover, to thrive. Ji-hoon is not thriving. He is merely surviving. Minji's words hit Hyunwoo like a lightning bolt. Surviving. That echoed the truth he tried to ignore. His son, his heir, was merely surviving in an ice palace. So, what do you suggest, Miss Lee? Hyunwoo asked, ignoring Dr. Park's discomfort. Minji looked at him, her eyes serious. I suggest we look at Ji-hoon as a whole, not just his symptoms. His diet needs to be adapted to strengthen his fire, with foods that nourish without overwhelming. His environment needs to be more welcoming, less sterile, and we need to understand why his fire is so weak from the beginning. Is there something in his history, or perhaps in the family's history, that made him so vulnerable? Minji's last question hung in the air, dense and charged. Hyunwoo felt a shiver run down his spine. The Kim family's history, the death of his wife, Ji-hoon's mother, which he had tried to bury under layers of work and silent grief. Was there something there, a secret he had kept locked away, that could be connected to his son's fragility? Dr. Park, visibly uncomfortable, tried to regain control. Mr. Kim, perhaps we should focus on a more scientific approach to diet, with Miss Lee collaborating on ingredient selection that aligns with Ji-hoon's needs without resorting to... No, Hyunwoo interrupted him, his voice cold and final. Miss Lee has a point. Conventional treatments have failed to give Ji-hoon a full life. I want to know the root of the problem. Miss Lee, do you think Ji-hoon's health is linked to something deeper? Something that isn't in the medical records? Minji hesitated, but the determination in her eyes did not waver. Yes, Mr. Kim. Sometimes the body reflects the soul, and a child's soul is deeply affected by what surrounds it and by what preceded it. There is something in the mansion, Mr. Kim, or perhaps in Ji-hoon's history, that is preventing him from flourishing. The silence that followed was deafening. Hyunwoo felt the ice in his heart not only crack, but split deeply, revealing an old wound he thought had healed. The poor nanny, with her ancestral wisdom, was not just saving his son, she was unearthing the ghosts of his past. The game had changed. The tension was no longer about Ji-hoon's illness, but about the secrets the Kim mansion held, and which now threatened to come to light. And Minji, unknowingly, had just become the key to unraveling a mystery that could destroy, or finally, heal the Kim family. Minji's question hung in the living room air, heavier than the silence that followed. Is there something in the mansion, Mr. Kim, or perhaps in Ji-hoon's history, that is preventing him from flourishing? The words echoed in Hyunwoo's mind, not as an accusation, but as a key turning in a rusty lock. He felt a cold that had nothing to do with the room temperature, a cold that came from within, from a place he had sealed long ago. The Kim family's history, the death of his wife, Ji-hoon's mother, an abyss of pain and guilt that he had buried under layers of work, silent grief, and an impenetrable facade of control. Dr. Park cleared his throat again, the sound breaking the quiet. Mr. Kim, I understand Miss Lee's concern, but we need to stick to the facts. Modern medicine offers a range of treatments to strengthen Ji-hoon's immune system, to manage his allergies. We can adjust his diet based on rigorous nutritional analyses instead of... Hyunwoo raised a hand, silencing the doctor. His eyes, once fixed on emptiness, now turned to Minji. There was an intensity in them she had never seen. It wasn't anger nor disdain, but a search, a silent plea. Miss Lee, what exactly do you mean by family history? Are you suggesting Ji-hoon's illness is psychosomatic or some curse? The last word came out with a tone of mockery, an attempt to protect himself from the truth that was beginning to insinuate itself. Minji was not intimidated. Her eyes met his with a serene calm. I'm not talking about curses, Mr. Kim. I'm talking about energy, about legacy, the emotions, traumas, and secrets of a family can indeed affect the vitality of its youngest members, especially the most sensitive ones. Ji-hoon is like a delicate plant. He absorbs everything around him. If the soil is poisoned, the plant cannot thrive, no matter how much we water it or expose it to the sun. Minji's words were like arrows, each hitting a sensitive spot in Hyunwoo's armor. Poisoned. He remembered the oppressive silence of the mansion after his wife's death, the void he had created to protect himself. Without realizing, he was suffocating his own son. He had built a mausoleum, not a home. Miss Lee, with all due respect, Dr. Park interjected, his voice laden with impatience, we are straying from medical protocol. Ji-hoon's health is a physiological, not a metaphysical, matter. And what does Ji-hoon's physiology tell us, Dr. Park? Minji asked, turning to him. That he is constantly on the verge of collapse, that conventional treatments keep him alive but don't cure him. Don't make him strong, don't make him happy, don't make him flourish. She looked back at Hyunwoo. Your son doesn't just have a weak fire, Mr. Kim. He has a heart that yearns for something denied to him. And I feel that this is linked to something the mansion holds. Hyunwoo felt a shiver, a yearning heart. He had closed himself off so much to pain that he had forgotten Ji-hoon also felt. He had tried to fill the void with the best doctors, the best toys, the best education, but had neglected what truly mattered: human warmth, connection, truth. He stood up abruptly, the chair scraping on the marble floor, the sound echoing through the room. Dr. Park flinched slightly. Minji remained seated, her eyes fixed on his, unafraid. Dr. Park, Hyunwoo said, his voice low but laden with a renewed authority, I appreciate your dedication, but as of today, the approach to Ji-hoon's health will change. Miss Lee will be in charge of his diet and his environment. I want you to collaborate with her, providing the necessary analyses and examinations to ensure the changes are safe and effective. Dr. Park looked shocked. Mr. Kim, this is unprecedented. Entrusting the diet of such a delicate patient to someone without formal medical training, based on unscientific concepts. I trust Miss Lee, Hyunwoo interrupted him, his voice sharp. She saved my son's life when your methods failed, and she gave me a perspective none of you ever dared to present." He turned to Minji. "Miss Lee, you have my full authority. Do whatever it takes to strengthen Ji-hoon's fire. And I want you to tell me what you feel about this family history. What does the mansion hide? What do you feel is preventing my son from flourishing?" Minji nodded, the responsibility now not just weighing, but burning on her shoulders. She knew she was entering dangerous territory, unearthing secrets that might have been buried for a reason. But Ji-hoon's life depended on it. Hyun-woo walked to the large window, looking at the immaculate garden, but not truly seeing it. His eyes were fixed on a distant point, on a past he had tried to erase, the image of his wife, smiling before illness took her, the guilt he felt for not being able to save her, for failing to protect her. And now, the possibility that this same pain, this same failure, was haunting his son. He felt Minji's presence approach. She stood beside him, looking at the same garden. "Mr. Kim," she said, her voice soft, "sometimes healing begins with truth, and truth, however painful, is the only path to freedom." Hyun-woo closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. Freedom. He didn't know what would come to light, what ghosts would be awakened. But for the first time in years, he felt a spark of hope mixed with an overwhelming fear. The ice in his heart had not just cracked, it was melting, revealing the open wound he had tried to hide. And Minji, the poor nanny, was about to guide him through a labyrinth of memories and secrets, a path that could lead them to healing or to the complete destruction of the Kim family. The game had changed, and the stakes were the very soul of the family. The mansion, once a silent tomb, now seemed to whisper forgotten stories, waiting to be heard. The mansion, once a silent tomb, now seemed to whisper forgotten stories, waiting to be heard. Minji's words had broken the spell of ice Hyun-woo had cast over his own life, and with it, the facade of control that Dr. Park and conventional medicine represented. Dr. Park, his face pale and a vein throbbing in his temple, attempted one last objection. "Mr. Kim, I urge you to reconsider. Miss Lee, despite her good intentions, does not possess the medical knowledge to—" Hyun-woo turned to him, his eyes dark and icy. "Dr. Park, your dedication is unquestionable. But as of today, Miss Lee is not just Ji-hoon's nanny, she is the guardian of his vitality. Your role will be to provide scientific support for the changes she implements. If you cannot do that, we will find someone who can." The veiled threat was clear. Dr. Park swallowed hard, defeat etched on his face. "Understood, Mr. Kim. I will collaborate fully." He gave a stiff bow and left, the sound of his footsteps echoing on the marble laden with resentment. Silence returned, but it was a different silence, no longer the oppressive emptiness, but a space filled with the tension of expectation. Hyun-woo still had his back to Minji, looking at the garden, but now he felt her presence in a way that went beyond the physical. She was a catalyst, a force he had underestimated. "Miss Lee," he said, his voice still low, "you have my trust and my permission to go wherever necessary. But I need clarity. What exactly will you do, and how do you intend to unravel these secrets?" Minji took a step forward, her voice soft but firm. "I will start with what I can see and feel, Mr. Kim. With Ji-hoon's environment, his room, his routine, the people around him. A plant cannot flourish in a pot that doesn't nourish it. And then I will observe Ji-hoon's reactions. He is the key. His body will tell us what his soul needs." She paused, then continued, with a courage that surprised even herself. "And as for the secrets, they are not hidden in books or documents. They are in the energy of this house, in the memories it holds, in the places where pain and joy were most felt. I will look for those echoes, Mr. Kim. I will listen to what the mansion has to say." Hyun-woo closed his eyes again. A fleeting image of his wife smiling crossing his mind. The pain was a sharp dagger. What if what the mansion has to say is something I don't want to hear? Minji responded without hesitation. Then it will be the truth Ji-hoon needs to live, Mr. Kim. And truth, however painful, is the only path to freedom. He turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. For the first time, he saw not just the nanny, but a woman with unwavering wisdom and strength. Start tomorrow, Miss Lee, and keep me informed of every step. The next morning, the Kim mansion seemed to vibrate with a different energy. Minji began her work with methodical calm. She didn't invade, but observed. She spent hours in Ji-hoon's room, not just tidying, but feeling. She noticed the sterility, the excess of white and grey, the absence of warmth, of vibrant colors, of objects that told a story. It was a perfect room, but soulless. Ji-hoon, she said softly, as he drew at his desk, do you like your room? The boy, pale and with dark circles under his eyes, merely shrugged. It's my room. And what would you like it to have? She asked, sitting beside him. He hesitated, then pointed to a drawing of a small yellow sun he had made. More colors, and maybe a nice smell, not like a hospital. Ji-hoon's words were a ray of light for Minji. The boy's fire yearned for life, for sensations, for warmth. She began to act. First, the diet. With Dr. Park's reluctance, she introduced nutritious and warm broths, seasoned with herbs she herself selected, rich in nutrients that strengthened the immune system and, as she said, warmed the body from the inside out. She replaced processed snacks with fresh fruit and seeds. But the environment was the greater challenge. She asked Hyun-woo for permission to make small changes to Ji-hoon's room. He, to the surprise of the other staff, granted it. Minji brought small, colorful potted plants into the room, chose curtains with soft, warm patterns, and even hung some of Ji-hoon's drawings on the walls. She lit a diffuser with soft, essential oils, which filled the air with a calming and natural aroma, replacing the smell of disinfectant. The changes were subtle but noticeable. Ji-hoon, once withdrawn, began to show small signs of interest. He smiled more, though it was still a weak smile. He ate with a little more appetite, but most importantly, he began to talk to Minji about his dreams, about the books he read, about the things he saw out the window. Hyun-woo watched from a distance, a mix of skepticism and hope growing in his chest. He saw the poor nanny with her simple hands, transforming his son's sterile environment into a sanctuary of warmth and life. He saw Ji-hoon, for the first time in years, looking a little less like a patient and a little more like a child. But Minji knew this was just the beginning. The true root of the problem was still hidden. She felt the mansion. She felt the weight of an ancient sadness, unresolved grief, hanging like a cold mist over the corridors. There was one floor in particular, the main floor, where the presence of Ji-hoon's mother, the late Mrs. Kim, was almost palpable in her absence. One day, while Ji-hoon slept peacefully after one of Minji's nutritious broths, she found herself drawn to the main living room, where the meeting with Hyun-woo and Dr. Park had taken place. Her eyes swept over the luxurious but impersonal setting. Then, she noticed, above the fireplace, a large, imposing portrait. It was Mrs. Kim, a woman of ethereal beauty, but with a distant, almost melancholic gaze even in her smile. Minji felt a shiver. It wasn't the image of a happy woman, but of someone carrying a burden. She approached the portrait, her fingers almost touching the frame. There was something in Mrs. Kim's eyes that seemed to plead an unspoken secret, a pain that echoed through time. At that moment, Hyun-woo entered the room silently. He found her standing before his wife's portrait, her eyes fixed on the image. A wave of emotions hit him, pain, guilt, and a sudden anger that Minji had invaded that sacred space of his memory. "Miss Lee," he said, his voice sharp, "what are you doing?" Minji turned, unfazed by the intensity in his eyes. "I'm listening, Mr. Kim. I'm listening to what the mansion has to say, and it's telling me a story. The story of a woman who wasn't as happy as she seemed, and the story of a secret that Ji-hoon might be feeling even today." Hyunwoo felt the ground tremble beneath his feet. The ice he had tried to rebuild in his heart was shattering again, revealing the open wound he had tried to hide for so long. Minji wasn't just healing his son. She was unearthing the ghosts he had buried alive. And Mrs. Kim's portrait, with its melancholic gaze, seemed to agree. The game had changed, and the stakes were the very soul of the family. Minji was about to open Pandora's box. Hyunwoo's voice, sharp as ice, pierced the silence of the winter garden. "Miss Lee, what have you found?" It wasn't a question, but an accusation, a warning. His eyes, before merely tense, now burned with a contained fury, but also with a fear he desperately tried to hide. He had built a fortress around his wife's memory, and Min-ji, with her simplicity and intuition, had just found the secret door. Minji remained kneeling, the diary and letters in her hands, as if they were shields against the approaching storm. She felt the weight of the truth she held, the fragility of an exposed soul. Ji-hoon, beside her, stopped drawing. His eyes, always so observant, fixed on his father, then on her, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. "Mr. Kim," Minji began, her voice surprisingly firm, despite her pounding heart. "I found the truth your wife left behind, the truth Ji-hoon needs to heal." She held up the diary, its faded leather cover seeming to absorb the light. "This isn't just a diary. It's the silent cry of a woman who was losing herself, suffocated by this mansion, by this life she didn't choose." Hyunwoo took a step forward. His jaw clenched. "You have no right to touch her things, to invade my wife's privacy." His voice was low, but laden with an authority that would make most people recoil. But Minji was not most people. She had seen Ji-hoon's pain, and that gave her unwavering courage. "And Ji-hoon's right to a full life, Mr. Kim?" Minji retorted, slowly rising, the diary still secure in her hands. "He is slowly dying, not just from an allergy, but from a sadness he absorbed from his mother, a sadness that you, perhaps, never wanted to see." The accusation hit Hyunwoo like a blow. His eyes darkened further, and for an instant, Minji saw a crack in his steel facade, a glimpse of genuine pain. "You don't know what you're talking about," he hissed. "My wife was happy. She had everything." She had everything except freedom," Minji corrected, opening the diary to a random page. She wrote, "I feel like a bird in a golden cage. I have everything, but I have nothing. My soul yearns to fly, to create, to be more than just CEO Kim's wife. But here, my wings are clipped." Minji read the words with a clarity that echoed through the garden, filling the space with Mrs. Kim's melancholy. Hyunwoo paled. He looked away, as if the words had materialized in the air, visible to all. Ji-hoon, for his part, watched his father with unusual intensity, his small fingers clutching his drawing pad. "She felt lonely, Mr. Kim," Minji continued, her voice now softer but still laden with conviction. "Even surrounded by luxury, she felt she was disappearing, and the only thing that kept her sane was Ji-hoon's smile. But even she feared he would feel the sadness she tried to hide." She then picked up the letter addressed to Ji-hoon. "And this, Mr. Kim, this is for your son. A message from a mother who loved him more than anything, but who couldn't overcome the darkness that consumed her." Minji hesitated for a moment, but knew there was no other way. She wrote, "My beloved son, if you are reading this, it means I couldn't overcome it. I failed. But I want you to know that I love you more than words can express. You are the light of my life, the only thing that gave me strength to go on. But this life, this mansion, it is consuming me. I wish I had been stronger for you, fought harder. But the darkness within is so great. Please, Ji-hoon, don't let your mother's sadness consume you too. Find your own light, your own voice. Don't be silent. Don't get lost as I got lost. The last words hung in the air, a lament from the past that connected directly to the present. Tears streamed down Minji's face, but she didn't wipe them away. She looked at Hyunwoo, whose eyes were now fixed on the letter, his expression a complex mixture of shock, denial, and overwhelming grief. It was as if he was seeing his wife for the first time, not the perfect image he had built, but the real woman, with her struggles and her suffering. "Mr. Kim," Minji said, her voice choked, "Ji-hoon is not just reacting to food, he is reacting to his mother's unresolved pain. He is absorbing her anguish, the fear of getting lost, of not having a voice. His illness is an echo. It is his body screaming what her soul could no longer bear." She pointed to the butterfly brooch in her hand. The butterfly, a symbol of transformation, of freedom. It was what she yearned for, what she never had. Hyunwoo staggered back, his hands clenched into fists. The truth, brutal and undeniable, hit him squarely. He had ignored the signs, perhaps out of convenience, perhaps because he didn't know how to deal with his wife's fragility, or perhaps because he was so absorbed in his own world of business and power. He had failed to protect her, and now that failure was manifesting in the son he loved more than anything. His gaze moved from Minji to Ji-hoon, who now stared at him with a seriousness that went beyond his age. The boy seemed to understand, to feel the truth that was being revealed. His eyes, so similar to his mother's, were an echo of the pain Minji described. I didn't know," Hyunwoo murmured, his voice hoarse, almost inaudible. The armor of the cold, unwavering CEO finally shattered. The pain was palpable, the guilt overwhelming. He had kept his wife in a golden cage, and she had died of sadness, and now his son was following the same path. Minji knew this was the turning point. The barrier had fallen. The game was no longer about secrets, but about healing. "We can save him, Mr. Kim," she said, extending the letter to him. "But for that, we need to face this truth. We need to give a voice to his mother and give Ji-hoon the freedom she never had." Hyunwoo took the letter, his hands trembling slightly. He looked at his son's name, written in his late wife's hand. In that moment, CEO Kim, the man of steel, was just a father who had lost his wife and was about to lose his son. The path ahead would be painful, but for the first time in years, there was a real chance of light. The darkness that enveloped the Kim mansion began to dissipate, revealing the wounds that needed to be healed. That touch, light, almost imperceptible, yet it resonated like silent thunder in the winter garden. Ji-hoon's small hand in his father's was not just a gesture, it was a bridge, built over years of silence and pain. Hyunwoo felt the fragility of that touch, the faint warmth of his son's skin, and a wave of emotions swept over him. The guilt was still there, a tight knot in his stomach, but now, mixed with it, was a new and overwhelming feeling. Hope. Ji-hoon didn't speak. His eyes, however, were an open book. In them, Minji saw not only the pain of a child who finally understood his mother's sadness, but also a spark of something new, something that resembled liberation. He looked at Hyunwoo, not with the fear or distance of before, but with a melancholy curiosity, as if seeing his father for the first time. Hyunwoo gently squeezed Ji-hoon's hand. His wife's words, read aloud, echoed in his mind. "Don't be silent, don't get lost as I got lost." He had failed her. He would not fail his son. The armor of CEO Kim, which had shattered, now began to be rebuilt, not with cold steel, but with the resilience of a father determined to correct his mistakes. "Ji-hoon," he said, his voice still hoarse, but now charged with a new resolution. We will change things. I promise." Minji approached, placing a hand on Hyunwoo's shoulder. Mr. Kim, a promise is a good start. But action is healing. Ji-hoon needs more than words now. He needs a new world. She looked at the diary open, then at the butterfly brooch in her hand. He needs to fly. Hyun-woo nodded, his eyes fixed on his son. What? What should we do first? The question, coming from the man who always had all the answers, revealed his vulnerability but also his willingness to learn. First, we need to give a voice to his mother, Minji responded, her voice soft but firm. We cannot erase the past, but we can rewrite it for Ji-hoon. He needs to know who she was, not just the image the mansion created. He needs to know the woman who dreamed of painting, of traveling, of living free. Hyun-woo looked at the diary. Her diary? Yes, Minji confirmed. Read to him. Talk about her. Show him the things she loved. Let him feel her presence in a way that isn't painful, but inspiring. The idea of revisiting his wife's memories, not as a burden of guilt, but as a guide to his son's healing, was something Hyun-woo had never considered. He had always kept them in a sanctuary of pain, untouchable, but now he saw the way. And the allergy? Hyun-woo asked. The physical concerns still present. The doctors said it was severe, that he was weakening. The allergy is a reflection, Mr. Kim, Minji explained patiently. Ji-hoon's body is reacting to the environment, to the pressure, to the sadness he absorbed. When his soul begins to heal, his body will also have a chance. We need a new environment, new experiences, fewer walls, more horizons. The word walls hit Hyun-woo squarely. He had built walls to protect his wife and then his son, but these walls became prisons. He looked around the winter garden, a place of controlled beauty, but still an enclosed space. We need to get out of here, he murmured almost to himself. We need fresh air. Minji smiled slightly. Exactly, and not just physically. Ji-hoon needs choices. He needs to feel that he has control over his own life, something his mother never had. Small things at first. What he wants to eat, where he wants to play, what he wants to draw. Give him the voice she didn't have. The tension, though softened by hope, still hung in the air. The task ahead was monumental, to deconstruct years of silence and repression, to redefine a relationship, and to heal a child who was on the verge of collapse. But for the first time, Hyun-woo didn't feel alone. He had Minji, the nanny, who had seen the truth where no one else saw it. And he had the memory of his wife, no longer a shadow, but a light to guide them. The butterfly's path of transformation was just beginning. It would be painful, full of relapses and challenges. But the seed of freedom had been planted, and Hyun-woo, the cold and distant CEO, was ready to water it, even if it meant dismantling his entire own world to do so. The Kim mansion, once a monument to his own definition of success, now seemed like a mausoleum. He knew he needed to tear down his own walls, not just Ji-hoon's, so that both could finally breathe. Night fell, but the darkness didn't seem so oppressive. There was a promise in the air, a whisper of change. Minji watched father and son, who now sat side by side, the mother's letter still in Hyun-woo's hands. The silence between them was no longer hollow, but filled with the possibility of a new beginning. The butterfly on her brooch seemed to vibrate with a new energy, ready to spread its wings. Dawn broke over the Kim mansion, but it wasn't the same cold light as before. There was a promise in the air, a faint thread of hope that seeped through the heavy curtains. In the winter garden, where the truth had been finally unveiled, Hyun-woo still held Ji-hoon's hand. The boy, exhausted by the emotions, had fallen asleep right there, his head resting on his father's shoulder. Minji watched them, her heart heavy, but also strangely light. The darkness hadn't completely disappeared, but the first crack of light had emerged. Hyun-woo didn't move. He didn't care about the stiffness of his muscles or the fatigue that weighed on him. That moment, his son's hand in his, Ji-hoon's fragile body nestled against his, was more precious than any business meeting, any empire he could build. He looked at his wife's diary, still open to the page where she spoke of her lost dreams, of her trapped butterfly. The promise he had made to Minji, to himself, and most importantly, to Ji-hoon and his wife's memory, echoed in his mind. "We will change things." When Ji-hoon finally opened his eyes, the sun was already high. He blinked, confused. Before his eyes met his father's, there was no usual fear, no distance. There was a quietness, an acceptance. Hyunwoo smiled, a small, hesitant but genuine smile. "Good morning, son," he said, his voice still hoarse. Minji approached, bringing a glass of water. "Ji-hoon, did you sleep well?" The boy nodded, his curious eyes fixed on the diary. "Mom, she liked butterflies?" he asked, his voice a whisper. Hyunwoo picked up the diary, his fingers tracing the cover. "She loved them, Ji-hoon. She dreamed of being one, of flying far away." He opened the diary and began to read, not the farewell letter, but excerpts of dreams, of small wishes, of moments of joy his wife had recorded. He read about a field of wildflowers she wanted to visit, about the melody of a piano that made her feel free, about the colors she dreamed of painting. Each word was a step towards deconstructing the image of the sad and sickly mother, replacing it with that of the vibrant woman she once was. Ji-hoon listened attentively, his eyes following the words, imagining the scenes. It was the first time he had heard about his mother in such a personal, intimate way, not as a distant and tragic figure, but as someone with hopes and dreams just like him. "And the allergy?" Hyunwoo asked Minji later, while Ji-hoon was in the kitchen, surprisingly asking to choose his own breakfast. A small victory. "He still seems fragile." Minji watched Ji-hoon, who was now pointing to a type of fruit he had never eaten before. "Healing is a process, Mr. Kim. But look, he's making a choice. He's exercising his voice. That's vital. The body and soul are interconnected. We need to continue to nourish his soul. You said we needed a new environment. Fewer walls, more horizons," Hyunwoo reflected, looking at the mansion's vast and imposing corridors. "This place is the prison I built." "It's not just the place, Mr. Kim," Minji explained. "It's the rules, the expectations, the lack of freedom. Ji-hoon needs space to be a child, to explore, to make mistakes without the pressure of being the CEO's son. Your mother also needed that." Hyunwoo nodded, a new determination hardening his jaw. "I understand. I'm going to sell the mansion." Minji blinked, surprised. The decision was radical, drastic, but understandable. "Sell? So to the mansion?" "Yes, and I'm going to take time off work. The time I should have given my wife, I will give to Ji-hoon. We're going to travel. We're going to see the world my wife dreamed of seeing. We're going to paint like she wanted. We're going to live the experiences she couldn't live." Hyunwoo's voice was firm, but his eyes revealed the magnitude of the sacrifice he was willing to make. He was dismantling not just his home, but the very foundation of his identity as the ruthless CEO Kim. The news spread like wildfire through the mansion. The staff, accustomed to the unchanging routine and the boss's coldness, were in shock. CEO Kim, the man who never took vacations, who lived for work, was stepping away. And selling the property that was a symbol of his power, there were whispers, curious glances, but Hyunwoo's determination was unwavering. In the days that followed, the mansion began to change. Hyunwoo read to Ji-hoon every day, not just the diary, but adventure books, stories about distant places. He allowed Ji-hoon to paint on his bedroom walls, something unthinkable before. He even sat with his son, holding a paintbrush, trying to imitate Ji-hoon's simple drawings. Ji-hoon's laughter, once so rare, began to echo through the corridors. There were still moments of relapse. Ji-hoon still flinched sometimes, and the pallor on his face hadn't completely disappeared. The shadow of the allergy still lingered, a reminder of how deep the wound was. But the frequency of the episodes decreased, and the intensity seemed lessened. Ji-hoon's body was beginning to respond to the healing of his soul. Min-ji watched this transformation with a mix of relief and apprehension. She knew the journey was far from over. The decision to sell the mansion and travel was a gigantic step, but the outside world was vast and unpredictable. New pressures, new challenges would arise. The butterfly was beginning to stretch its wings, but the flight would be long and would require courage. One afternoon, while packing Ji-hoon's belongings for their imminent departure, Min-ji found a small drawing. It was a butterfly, colorful and vibrant, flying freely over a field of flowers. Beside it, Ji-hoon had written, in childish handwriting, "Mommy is flying." Tears streamed down Min-ji's face. The truth, however painful, had freed not only the mother's soul, but also the son's heart, and perhaps the father's too. The transformation was in full swing. CEO Kim was becoming a father, and Ji-hoon a child. The butterfly's path was open. The day of departure arrived, laden with a gentle melancholy and a contained excitement. The mansion, once a bastion of silence and rules, now seemed like an empty cocoon, ready to be left behind. Hyun-woo, dressed in casual clothes he rarely wore, held Ji-hoon's hand. The boy, with a small backpack on his back, looked at the main door, where so many monotonous days had begun and ended. There were no tears, only a sparkling curiosity in his eyes. Min-ji stood beside them, her butterfly brooch looking brighter than ever. She had chosen to accompany them, no longer as a hired nanny, but as a guide, a friend, the bridge between their past and future. Their first destination was a small coastal village, far from the city's hustle and bustle, a place Ji-hoon's mother had mentioned in her diary as a refuge of peace, with wildflower fields and the constant sound of waves. The house Hyun-woo rented was modest, but full of light, with windows that opened to the sea. It was a stark contrast to the cold opulence of the Kim mansion. In the first few days, Ji-hoon was cautious, exploring every corner with a familiar hesitation. Hyun-woo, for his part, seemed like a fish out of water. He tried to cook awkwardly and fumbled with household chores, something he had never needed to do. But he persisted with a determination that surprised Min-ji. One afternoon, as they walked along the beach, a strong wind kicked up sand, and Ji-hoon, caught by surprise, began to cough. The skin on his neck reddened, and his eyes watered. It was a mild episode, but the sight of that pale, frightened face made Hyun-woo's heart clench. Panic, an old acquaintance, threatened to overwhelm him. He knelt, holding his son, his mind racing for medicines, for hospitals. But then he felt Min-ji's gentle hand on his shoulder. "Breathe, Mr. Kim. He's just scared. His body is still learning to trust." She turned to Ji-hoon with a calm smile. "It's all right, Ji-hoon. It's just the sea wind. It's not the same as before, it's a new breeze." She picked him up, pointing at the seagulls flying above. "See, they're not afraid of the wind. They use it to fly higher." Hyun-woo watched, his breath still ragged, but the panic diminishing. He saw the trust in Ji-hoon's eyes as Min-ji spoke, and realized that healing wasn't just about avoiding triggers, but about reinterpreting the world, about building resilience. That night, Hyun-woo couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch, listening to the sea leafing through his wife's diary. He found an entry where she described an afternoon at the beach, feeling the wind on her face, imagining herself as a seagull. A sharp pang of regret hit him. So many moments he could have shared, so many simple joys he had denied her, and himself. He felt tears stream down, the first in years that weren't of anger or frustration, but of a deep, liberating sadness. The next morning, Ji-hoon woke with a smile. He ran to the balcony, pointing at the sky. "Dad! Seagulls!" Hyun-woo joined him, and together they watched the birds. "Your mother loved seagulls," Hyun-woo said, his voice soft. "She said they were free." Ji-hoon looked at him, and for the first time, Hyun-woo saw in his eyes not just his mother's image, but a spark of his own soul, a connection that had been broken and was now slowly being restored. The allergy hadn't completely disappeared, but with each passing day, each new experience, each genuine laugh, the shadow hanging over Ji-hoon seemed to diminish a little more. The butterfly's path was long, but they were flying together towards an unknown yet promising horizon. With each new dawn, the horizon expanded, and with it, Ji-hoon's soul. Weeks turned into months, and the small coastal village gave way to majestic mountains, ancient forests, and vibrant cities, each a new chapter in the diary of their lives. Hyun-woo, once a man of impeccable suits and endless meetings, now wore crumpled clothes, had hands stained with dirt from a garden he helped plant, and a face marked by sun and wind. He laughed more, a sound that once seemed strange, now felt natural, echoing through the landscapes they explored. Ji-hoon, for his part, flourished. The paleness gave way to a healthy glow, and his eyes, once so full of apprehension, sparkled with insatiable curiosity. He ran, jumped, and asked questions non-stop, absorbing the world like a sponge. The allergy, though still present as a distant shadow, had lost its power to paralyze him. There were moments, yes, of unexpected coughing or a slight reddening of the skin. But the response was no longer panic. It was the calm of Minji, the steady hand of Hyun-woo, and Ji-hoon's own resilience, who had learned to breathe deeply, to trust his body, to understand that not every discomfort was a fatal threat. They visited a lavender field in France, a place Ji-hoon's mother had described in her diary with an almost palpable passion. The air was fragrant, buzzing with bees. Ji-hoon, who before would have flinched at any insect, now watched the bees with fascination. Pointing at them and imitating their flight with his hands, Hyun-woo watched him, a lump in his throat. He knelt, picked a lavender flower, and offered it to Ji-hoon. The boy smelled it, smiled, and then placed it behind his father's ear. It was a simple gesture, but laden with an intimacy Hyun-woo never thought he would experience. Minji was always there, a constant and reassuring presence. She was no longer just a nanny, but the moral compass of that small family. Her wisdom, her patience, and her ability to see beauty and truth in every moment were the foundation upon which they were rebuilding their lives. One night, under a starry sky in the Atacama Desert, Hyun-woo found her sitting alone, watching the stars. "Minji," he said, his voice soft. I don't know how to thank you. You gave us a second chance. You taught us to live again." She smiled, a smile that lit up the darkness. "Mr. Kim, you and Ji-hoon did the work. I merely pointed the way, the courage to change, to face pain, to love again. That came from you." "But you showed us the truth about my wife," he continued, his voice choked. "You freed her, and in doing so, freed us too." Minji looked at the stars. "Truth always sets free, Mr. Kim, and love is the greatest healing of all." The journey wasn't just about seeing the world, but about seeing themselves in a new way. Hyun-woo began to paint, awkwardly at first, but with growing passion. He painted the landscapes his wife dreamed of, the butterflies she loved, and, increasingly, Ji-hoon's smiles. He wasn't an artist, but the act of creating, of expressing, was therapeutic. Ji-hoon painted beside him, his childish drawings full of vibrant colors and joy. A year passed since they left the mansion. They were on a small island in Greece, the sun kissing their skin, the turquoise sea inviting. Ji-hoon was on the beach, building a sandcastle with fierce dedication. He was dirty, wet, and most of all, happy. He laughed loudly when a wave knocked down his tower and started again, without frustration, just with the joy of the process. Hyunwoo watched, sitting in a beach chair, his wife's diary on his lap. He had read and reread every word, and now the pages no longer evoked pain, but a sweet melancholy and deep gratitude. He had kept the promise he made to himself and to her. He was living the life she dreamed of, and he was living it with the son she loved. Minji approached, handing him a glass of fresh juice. "He's so different," she said, her eyes fixed on Ji-hoon. "We are," Hyunwoo corrected, looking at her with immense gratitude. "All of us. You taught us that life isn't about avoiding pain, but about finding beauty in it. That true freedom isn't in high walls, but in open hearts." Ji-hoon suddenly ran up to them, his eyes sparkling. He held a seashell, intricately drawn, and offered it to Hyunwoo. "Dad, it's for you. It's a house for a sea butterfly." Hyunwoo took the shell, his fingers brushing Ji-hoon's. He looked at the shell, then at his son, and finally at Minji. In his eyes, there was no longer the CEO's coldness, nor the widower's pain. There was only love, acceptance, and a deep peace. The butterfly finally had found its flight. Not far away, but within, into the heart of a family that, against all odds, had learned to love, to heal, and to live. The butterfly's path had no end. It was a continuous journey of discoveries, of laughter, and of a love that, like the sea wind, was free and eternal. They were ready for any horizon. Together, a family united by truth, by healing, and by the promise of a bright future.